Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the QUT Faculty of Law for today's conference on intellectual property and education in the age of COVID. As is always the case, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, and in keeping with the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where QUT now stands and recognise that these have always been places of teaching and learning, and we wish to pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play within the QUT community. And in the context of debates around intellectual property and education, there has been very significant discussion about the importance of Indigenous intellectual property. Today's event is going to look at some of the relationships and connections and intersections between intellectual property and education. It will cover many different species of intellectual property, spanning copyright law, trademark law, patent law, trade secrets, and questions of licensing. In many ways, the conference today is also going to span an array of different disciplines within education, everything from the creative industries to medicine and biotechnology and even clean technology. In addition, this event is also going to focus upon open licensing within the educational institutions. So the use of open licensing to promote open access, open innovation and open data is also a very kind of important dimension in terms of the debate and discussion over intellectual property and education. This event is also going to focus upon the role of universities and educational institutions and research organisations in responding to the coronavirus COVID-19 public health crisis. So universities and research institutions have a very particular special role to play as keystones in the knowledge infrastructure. They are generating a whole wide range of technologies that could be of use in tackling the coronavirus crisis, including vaccines, treatments and diagnostics, as well as a range of other public policy solutions. So this event, amongst other things, is going to think about ways and means in which we can encourage public transfer of some of those research and public policy solutions. Finally, this event is also going to be an Australian launch for this research handbook on intellectual property and technology transfer, edited by Professor Jacob Rooksbury from Gonzaga Law School. This collection provides a comparative analysis of how an array of different countries manage intellectual property and technology transfer from educational institutions, and also kind of includes a contribution by myself looking at intellectual property and higher education and 3D printing. So welcome everyone. I hope you enjoy today's range of presentations looking at different aspects of intellectual property and education. Thank you. Our final talk for today in the segment on open access and education is by Stephanie Bradbury and Katya Henry, who are from the Office for Scholarly Communication at QUT Library. They will be talking about open educational resources, social justice, equity and inclusion in the age of COVID-19, which is kind of particularly important given some of the concerns about how the pandemic has exacerbated the digital divide and has led to great inequities in terms of access to education.
Thank you, Matthew, and it's Katya Henry's and my pleasure to present to you today on open educational research resources. And I'm going to give a little bit of the QUT context and then get into a few examples of open educational resources, or OERs, and then Katya's going to go on and talk more about the social justice, equity and inclusion side, as well as that the impact that OERs have had on the age of COVID-19. So here at QUT, we are committed to the creation and dissemination of knowledge for the benefit of society. And this includes supporting the adoption, adaptation and creation of open educational resources, or OERs, to widen access to education and to improve both the cost efficiency and quality of teaching and learning, and to improve both the cost efficiency, and quality of teaching and learning outcomes. OERs have a big role to play in social justice, equity and inclusion in higher education in this age of COVID-19, and the impact they have had on students, and the case for OERs is even more compelling. Here is the definition of open educational resources. I won't read it out, but want to stress the key elements that are educational materials and the license, which allows users to reuse, adapt and modify the material. A little more about the QUT context, and at QUT we are extremely fortunate that our blueprint 6 explicitly states our aspirations for inclusion and an aim to enable our students to become truly global citizens who create positive social change and robust public, private and social institutions. And in addition, QUT is committed to advancing its leadership in open science and open scholarship, so it makes sense that OERs fit well into the fabric of our learning and teaching and open goals, and support QUT's commitment to social justice, equity and inclusion. And just finally, more on QUT supporting OERs. QUT has a policy that directly addresses OER creation. It emphasises that QUT encourages the use of appropriate and high-quality open educational resources and sharing high-quality OERs where QUT's reputation and values are promoted, including social justice and equity in education and research. And of course, the licensing of OERs is also supported by QUT's intellectual property policy. We have some OERs here already at QUT, and open textbooks are already in use in QUT courses, including, of course, in the Faculty of Law. These have been adopted or adapted from already published open textbooks or have been created by our QUT academics. In 2020, QUT's Learning and Teaching Unit is piloting the use of Pressbooks, an open textbook publishing platform to facilitate the adaptation and creation of open textbooks by QUT academics. And as a sign of the times, this pilot program has had great uptake and already reached its target, and that was much, much faster than anticipated. So how do OERs work? There are 3 ways they can be used: adoption, adaptation, and creation. Not the first, adoption, is the simplest. There could be a fabulous open education textbook that exists, that fits a unit or subject, and all it takes is that academic to adopt it as their text. Secondly, adaptation. This is the beauty of OERs. Not only are they free to be used, but they're also free to be adapted. And the third way is from scratch, creation. So a little bit about adoption first and the benefits of these. Now, first, I've got 4 benefits there. First one is quality, and there's a perception out there that less rigour in the reviewing will mean poor quality textbook, but this isn't so. All OERs are available for open review. The bells and whistles, you get access to the extra bits you get with a traditional textbook and more. This can be video content, quiz banks, exercises, instructor and student versions. Fit for purpose. OERs don't need to be generic like traditional textbooks. They can be built to fit the Australian contents, for instance, and speak directly to your or their unit. And while change from a long-standing textbook can be painful and time-consuming for an academic who has worked with a textbook for a long time, once adopted, Updates to text and assessment are fast and simple. Okay, I'm going to give a few examples now. Academics are often concerned about quality, as I said before, when it comes to OERs, and that texts haven't been through the usual editorial process. But a benefit of an OER is that Textbook Network collects reviews of open textbooks from academics. If a text doesn't live up to expectations, an honest review will show what needs to be improved, and the academics can make the changes. And this slide here shows how the reviews of OERs can change behaviour in use of them. Now, the bells and whistles, and there are many available. If they are missing, they can then be added. This is the #1 adopted physics book in the USA. OpenStax in Rice College tracks the usage stats. This book can be accessed in multiple formats. It can be printed for about 20% of what a commercial book would cost. And third-party vendors such as Bookshare provide an online service where you can get content converted to accessible formats such as Braille. And of course, you couldn't technically do this legally with a commercial textbook. So remembering that an open textbook is a textbook with a CC or Creative Commons license, it's free and you are given the permissions just discussed, and it may come with ancillary student resources and instructor resources as well. Here's an example of some student resources for that previous physics textbook I showed. As you can see, there are a lot of extra resources available that can bring the subject or unit to life. And again, from the same physics textbook, here are some examples of instructor resources. They can really make the resource work for the academic. There are PowerPoint slides and a swathe of other very rich ancillary resources. So the key message here is don't assume that open textbooks are standalone and don't come with extra high quality resources. There are also third-party ancillary resources from proprietary vendors that are usable with open textbooks. So OERs have the capacity to provide incredibly rich experiences for both students and academics. What do you do when the OERs out there don't quite fit your needs? You can adapt. This is what we call the middle road. You can use what already exists and contextualise. You can make it fit your needs. This is potentially less work than creating an OER from scratch, and the result will still be a resource which is relevant to your unit, subject, place and time. This can even be done using open pedagogy and partnering with your students to deliver a deeper learning experience. Just to give you some examples of fit for purpose and what academics have already done, this is an example of customising the content of an open textbook to meet the specific content needs of students. On the left is an open textbook for a low-level statistics course, which was purely based on theory. An academic who adopted this book found her students were struggling to translate the concepts into practice and use them in Excel. So she and her colleagues adapted this book and created a revised book on the right with the Excel examples embedded into the text and included alongside the theory. The students did much better. She was able to adapt to the needs of that particular cohort. Now, localisation. OERs can be adapted to fit different places. This example looks at contextualisation in the geographic sense. It's the same book but different editions. On the left is an open textbook created at Rice University in the States, and on the right a Canadian edition made at the University of British Columbia, which is a derivative of the American text. And of course we're sitting in Australia and we all know what it feels like to have a textbook actually speak to us. The right language and spelling, jurisdictional and government systems, and right measurements. Now, another example from Africa. An astronomy faculty in Africa were tired of Northern Hemisphere astronomy books that didn't have Southern Hemisphere star charts. The students were seeing skies in the books that didn't reflect their own reality. So the solution was that Kelsey Merkley helped the astronomy faculty in South Africa to revise an open astronomy textbook for the Southern Hemisphere. So the content focused on stars that the students could actually see. Prior to this, most astronomy textbooks were written in Europe or the US for the Northern Hemisphere. Now, a third option is to create an OER from scratch, and this is the most onerous but rewarding way to create and use an OER. It can even be done in partnership with students with some fabulous pedagogical outcomes and benefits for the students. It could fill a gap in content that is not being picked up anywhere else. Here is another example of what you can do with a CC license, Creative Commons license, in terms of open pedagogy and OER-enabled pedagogy. Robin DeRosa and her undergrad students curated texts in the public domain and free of copyright restrictions. The resulting work, Early American Literature, includes introductions, contents, videos, etc. Students in her class created their own introductions, discussions, questions, assignments, and occasionally short films related to the texts, and are sharing these resources back. They continue to improve this anthology, and it helps everyone. A key message from Robin was open textbooks do save money, which matters deeply to our students, but they can also create a new relationship between learners and course content. And if teachers choose to acknowledge and enable this, it can have a profound effect on the whole fabric of the course. Students can even help faculty create the test bank. It's an example of active learning that creates new things for other students and teachers to learn from and use. One example this here is from Open Pedagogy Notebook, and where students are creating their own test bank. And just a little bit on Open Pedagogy Notebook. It's a global organisation that aims to create a space for faculty everywhere to share, discuss and develop assignments, materials, activities, assessments and more. And now my final example is from David Wiley at Brigham Young University, who taught a class on project management for instructional designers. He and his students spent a semester adapting an open project management textbook into this textbook. In subsequent terms, his students added assessment items, recorded videos of instructional designers talking about project management, and continued to make improvements. Really nicely, when each term is over, the students have authorship credit, thus achieving empowering, active, deep learning with students as partners. So that's an overview of how OERs address the learning and teaching needs. Katya is now going to address why OERs are so important in the age of COVID-19.
Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, so when considering OERs and social justice, equity and inclusion, we look to Lambert's 3 principles of social justice applied to open education. So this model has been adopted by Deakin University's research project, Australian Open Textbooks as Social Justice, a project that examines the transformative impact of open textbooks within the Australian context. So redistributive or economic justice refers to making educational resources, textbooks or courses free to learners who by circumstance of socio-cultural position cannot afford them, particularly learners who could be excluded from education or be more likely to fail due to lack of access to learning materials. Recognitive justice refers to socio-cultural diversity in the open curriculum, which Stephanie alluded to in the section on adaptation and creation of open textbooks. And representational justice, meaning the self-determination of marginalised people and groups to speak for themselves and not have their stories told by others through the co-creation of OER texts and resources about learners by learners. So the adoption of OERs ensures access to learning resources regardless of economic or sociocultural circumstances. The adaptation of OERs ensures that learning resources are representative of our diverse learners. And the creation and co-creation of OERs with students ensures that learning resources are learner-centric and rooted in knowledge, attainment, and creation. So now we're going to take a look at the local student experience to briefly examine the impact that OERs can have on the lives of our students and why this particularly matters in the age of COVID-19. So the most recent Australia-wide survey on student finances was published by Universities Australia in 2017. And this survey found that 1/3 of university students have estimated that their expenses are greater than their income. 15% of students, around 1 in 7, regularly go without food or necessities because they can't afford them. And of full-time students who work, 30% work more than 20 hours a week and 10% work over 30 hours per week. And only 35% of students who work believe their work-study balance is satisfactory. And of course, some group of students, such as low SES students, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, and regional students, are more likely to experience financial hardship. And this is data that's 3 years old. So Donna Hughes, Student Welfare Officer here at QUT, remarked that the costs of textbooks is one that impacts on students. We often see students who do not purchase due to cost and being unable to afford them. These students will often struggle because of this. Textbooks in Australia have increased in cost at 3 to 4 times the rate of inflation, and most students will not buy a textbook in at least one unit, usually because of the cost. So this gives you an idea of the cost of nursing texts for just the first year, nearly $1,000. So textbook, and this is here at QUT, textbook unaffordability affects student outcomes. It impacts student poverty, and it also has an adverse academic impact. So how do students cope with the high costs of textbooks balanced with academic risk? And what is the academic impact that these actions have? So students may purchase an older edition of the textbook. They may delay purchasing the textbook. They may never purchase the textbook. They often share the textbook with other students, or they download textbooks from the internet, which of course is a legal risk. Earlier this year, we've also seen evidence that students are turning to Afterpay, putting themselves into debt in order to purchase their textbooks. The cost of required textbooks may have caused students to not purchase the required textbook, take fewer courses, not register for a specific course, earn a poor grade, drop a course, withdraw from a course, or fail a course. So how can we address this? So in addition to our library services, QUT has offered a textbook loan scheme. These schemes differed within each faculty, and some faculties had no scheme. You can see that within the health faculty, this is from 2018, 582 students took up the scheme, 269 in law, 76 in science and engineering, 199 in business and 39 in education. However, since then, the health, education and SEF faculty schemes have ceased to operate. So let's take a look at the added impact of COVID-19. So of those working in accommodation and food services, 1/3 of employees have lost work since mid-March. Younger people are among the hardest hit. So casual employees, as we know, who haven't been employed on regular hours for more than 12 months are not eligible for JobKeeper. That's many of our students. International students on a subclass 500 visa are limited to 40 hours paid work per fortnight during semester and cannot study part-time. And those who were working and lost their jobs are not eligible for JobKeeper payments. So they are particularly vulnerable. We've seen the Queensland Government step in to provide funds to support international students experiencing severe financial hardship. And within universities, we've seen student guilds and support services respond to this hardship with food banks, which actually closed during lockdown periods, and delivering food to these students. So how can we help? Universities and our students face a very uncertain future. As librarians and academics, there is one area that we can really make a difference in terms of the financial impact of COVID-19 and the equity and access needs of our students. And that is through the adoption, adaptation, and creation of open educational resources. OERs have a role to play in social justice, equity, and inclusion, And in this age of COVID-19 and the impact it has had on students, the case for OERs is even more compelling. Thank you.